the deadliest bounty hunter of the American frontier, Jim Courtright, the Wild West. A place of unbridled ambition, lawless lands, and men driven by the pursuit of power. Lawmen fought to maintain order while outlaws roamed free, carving out their own bloody legacies across a landscape that seemed to swallow justice whole. But one man stood above them all, a bounty hunter who dispatched more criminals than any sheriff could ever dream of, a gunfighter whose name echoed through saloons and dusty streets from Texas to Kansas, a lawman who became as dangerous as the men he hunted. This is the story of a man whose name has become legend, a bounty hunter who lived by the gun and died by it too. Welcome to the story of Jim Courtright, the deadliest bounty hunter of the American frontier. Number 1. The American frontier. The American frontier was an expansive, untamed territory stretching from the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean. This vast land, much of it unexplored by European settlers, was both a land of opportunity and chaos. The mid-19th century marked the peak of westward expansion, driven by the Manifest Destiny doctrine, which held that Americans were destined to expand across the continent. However, this movement clashed violently with indigenous populations, existing Mexican landholders, and rival settlers, leading to ongoing conflicts that would span decades and claim countless lives. The frontier was not for the faint of heart, wrote one early settler in his diary. It was a place where a man's worth was measured by his gun and his willingness to use it. At the heart of this chaotic environment was the lack of structured law enforcement. The federal government had little control over many of these frontier regions, leaving settlers to fend for themselves. Towns sprang up quickly around mines, railroads, and cattle drives, often without any formal governance. As populations boomed in these regions, the need for law enforcement became critical. Yet sheriffs and marshals were few and far between. In many cases, local law enforcement lacked the resources to keep the peace. Their jurisdiction was often limited, and criminals frequently fled across county or state lines, making it difficult to pursue justice. A sheriff who arrested a man in one county had no authority to chase him into the next. Outlaws quickly learned that all they had to do was cross an invisible line on a map, and they were free. Enter the bounty hunters. These individuals operated outside formal law enforcement but played a crucial role in maintaining some level of order. Bounty hunters were paid to track down criminals, often using wanted posters issued by lawmen or local governments offering rewards. They were the original independent contractors of justice men who worked for money rather than duty, but who often proved more effective than any appointed official. Bounty hunters answered to no one but themselves, explained a frontier historian. They didn't need warrants, they didn't need jurisdiction, they just needed a wanted poster and the willingness to go where the law couldn't or wouldn't follow. The Wild West was rife with notorious outlaws, robbers, cattle rustlers, and murderers who found the sparse landscape a perfect hideout. This made bounty hunters essential in tracking down fugitives who moved through the rugged mountains, deserts, and vast plains beyond the reach of traditional law enforcement. But the lawless terrain wasn't the only challenge. The American frontier was also shaped by its saloons, gambling halls, and brothels, which became hubs for both social interaction and criminal activity. Towns like Dodge City, Abilene, and Tombstone gained notoriety for their gunfights and rowdy nightlife. In these environments, violence was commonplace, as disputes were often settled with a gun rather than a court of law. The lack of legal infrastructure meant that personal grudges and disputes frequently escalated into deadly confrontations, further contributing to the frontier's chaotic reputation. In those towns, recalled an old cowboy in his memoirs, a man could be alive and drinking at sunset and dead in the street by moonrise, and nobody thought much of it either way. Despite the harsh conditions, the frontier attracted people from all walks of life. Some came to strike it rich through gold mining or cattle ranching. Others sought a new beginning, escaping the more rigid social structures of the eastern United States. But the promises of wealth and freedom were often coupled with hardship, as the frontier offered little in the way of security or certainty. Settlers had to contend not only with outlaws, but also with hostile wildlife, disease, and the unpredictable elements of nature. Droughts, harsh winters, and scarce resources made survival a constant struggle. In this environment, a man's reputation was often his only currency, and his gun, his only protection. The lawless environment of the frontier also gave rise to a specific type of individual, the vigilante. vigilante groups often formed in towns where law enforcement was ineffective or absent altogether. These groups took justice into their own hands, sometimes meting out brutal punishments to suspected criminals. However, vigilante justice often blurred the lines between right and wrong, as innocent people were occasionally caught in the crossfire of hastily formed judgments. The frontier had its own code, noted a historian. It wasn't written down anywhere, you just knew it, and if you broke it, you paid the price, sometimes with your life. It was into this world, this chaotic, violent, unpredictable world, that Jim Courtright was born. Number 2. Courtright's early life. Jim Courtright was born in 1848 in Sangamon County, Illinois, largely rural area where hunting and gun culture were part of daily life. As a young boy, he was fascinated by firearms, practicing for hours to improve his accuracy and speed. While other children played games, Courtright was learning to kill. The boy had an obsession with guns that went beyond normal curiosity, recalled a family acquaintance years later. He treated them like they were alive, like they were extensions of his own hands. Courtright's obsession with firearms became a defining trait of his early years. While many boys his age played, Courtright was already developing the skills that would later make him one of the fastest shooters in the West. He reportedly learned how to fire 2 revolvers at once, a rare skill that gave him a significant edge in gunfights, and carried his guns in a backward-facing holster for quicker draws. At the age of 17, when the American Civil War was raging, Courtright lied about his age to enlist in the Union Army, joining the 7th Iowa Infantry. Though the Civil War was a brutal and harrowing experience, it shaped Courtright's early understanding of violence and survival. During the war, he fought in some of the most intense and bloody battles, including the Siege of Vicksburg and the Battle of Fort Donelson. His conduct in these battles earned him a reputation as a fearless soldier. His skill with a rifle and quick decision-making saved his life on multiple occasions. It was during this time that Courtright's reputation for bravery grew, catching the attention of his superiors. The most notable incident in his military career occurred when he saved the life of General John A. Logan, a Union leader, during a skirmish. A bullet destined for the general struck Courtright, instead an act of heroism that solidified his reputation. The general's misunderstanding of Courtright's name, due to battlefield noise, led to him being referred to as Jim rather than his birth name Timothy, and the nickname stuck. "He took a bullet for a general and got a new name out of it," remarked a fellow soldier. That was Courtright, always trading one thing for another, always coming out ahead even when he got shot. After the Civil War, Courtright found it difficult to return to normal life. The experience had left him hardened, restless, and drawn to the lawlessness of the frontier. Instead of settling down, he traveled extensively, spending time in different parts of the American West, including Kansas and Nebraska. His wanderlust eventually led him to Texas, a state that was still grappling with violence, land disputes, and outlaw activity following the war. The chaotic, fast-growing towns of Texas appealed to Courtright, and it was here that his transition from soldier to bounty hunter and lawman began. Texas in those days was a proving ground, noted a frontier historian. If you could make it in Texas, you could make it anywhere, and if you couldn't, the ground would swallow you up without a second thought. Courtright's ability to handle firearms, coupled with his fearless demeanor, quickly made him a force to be reckoned with. His transition into law enforcement was not so much a calling as it was a way to channel his experience and skills into something profitable. The post-war frontier was a place where violence and power often went hand in hand, and Courtright knew how to navigate these treacherous waters. As a bounty hunter, he thrived, tracking down criminals and outlaws who evaded traditional lawmen. His methods were brutal and effective. He didn't just catch criminals, he made examples of them. Soon his reputation would grow beyond the Texas borders, spreading through the frontier like wildfire. "Men spoke of Courtright in whispers," wrote a frontier journalist. "They said he could draw faster than a striking rattler and shoot straighter than any man alive." Whether those stories were true mattered less than the fact that people believed them. In the West, belief was often enough. Number 3. The rise of Courtright. When Courtright arrived in Fort Worth in the late 1870s, the town was undergoing rapid transformation. It was a booming hub for cattle drives along the Chisholm Trail, and the combination of money, cowboys, and saloons made it a magnet for trouble. Hell's half-Acre district, notorious for gambling, prostitution, and drunken brawls, became ground zero for violence and lawlessness. The city desperately needed a figure to enforce some semblance of order, and Courtright, with his reputation for ruthlessness and skill with a gun, seemed like the perfect candidate. Fort Worth was a powder keg waiting for a match, recalled an early settler, and Courtright walked in like he owned the place, like he was the match. As city marshal of Fort Worth, Courtright was given authority to clean up the streets. He quickly gained a reputation for using fear and intimidation to control not just the outlaws, but also the town's citizens. His approach to law enforcement was brutal. He didn't hesitate to shoot down anyone who defied him. Courtright was known for his exceptional marksmanship and his ability to outdraw opponents in an instant, which made him a formidable presence. His tactics were often described as swift and lethal, and his track record of handling criminals was unmatched by any lawman of his time. He didn't arrest men so much as he removed them, observed a local newspaper editor. If you were causing trouble in Fort Worth, you had two choices: leave or die. Courtright didn't believe in second chances. Beyond his role as a lawman, Courtright operated in a morally gray area, using his position to establish a protection racket. Business owners, especially those in Hell's half-Acre, were forced to pay Courtright for protection, a fee that ensured their businesses wouldn't be harassed by criminals, or worse, by Courtright himself. This extortion scheme was well known, but few dared to challenge him because of his deadly reputation. Those who refused to pay often found themselves at the wrong end of his gun, or worse, disappeared entirely. Courtright had figured out something that few men in his position ever did, explained a historian. He understood that power wasn't just about the badge, it was about what you could do with it. He used the law to protect himself while operating completely outside it. Under Courtright's reign, Fort Worth's criminal elements lived in a state of constant fear. He maintained strict control over the local saloons, brothels, and gambling halls. His authority was unquestioned, and he leveraged it to accumulate power. His dual role as both protector and predator blurred the lines between law enforcement and criminal activity. But for many in Fort Worth, this system worked at least for a time. Businesses stayed open. The streets were less chaotic. Even if the peace was maintained through fear and violence, it was still peace. He kept the peace, admitted one saloon owner years later. I didn't like paying him, but I liked having my business burned down even less. You take the devil you know. Courtright's grip on the town wasn't just limited to Hell's half-Acre. His influence spread throughout Fort Worth as he cultivated relationships with powerful figures in the community, further solidifying his control. However, his methods began to draw resentment from certain factions, especially from those who saw him as more of a tyrant than a lawman. His reputation grew, but so did the opposition to his brutal enforcement tactics. Courtright's time as marshal was marked by increasing tension between maintaining order and enriching himself through fear balance that would eventually unravel. "Every tyrant makes enemies," noted a frontier journalist. "The question is never whether they'll come for you, it's when." And Courtright's win was getting closer every day. Number 4. The deadly confrontation in 1887. The stage was set for one of the most iconic showdowns in the history of the American West. Jim Courtright, who had built a reputation as a ruthless enforcer in Fort Worth, set his sights on Luke Short, a gambler, gunslinger, and saloon owner with a reputation that matched his own. Short had recently opened the White Elephant Saloon, a high-profile establishment that attracted both the wealthy and notorious figures of the town. Courtright, seeing the success of Short's business, decided it was a prime target for his protection racket. Courtright walked into the White Elephant like he owned it, recalled an eyewitness. He had that swagger, that look that said, "You know who I am, and you know what happens if you don't play along." Courtright demanded payment, as he had done with many other businesses. But Luke Short wasn't one to be easily intimidated. Luke Short had a reputation as a deadly shot and a man who didn't back down from a fight. Born in Mississippi and raised on the dangerous streets of Dodge City, Short had already faced several gunfights and come out on top by the time he arrived in Fort Worth. He was well versed in the art of survival. His ties to other well-known figures like Bat Masterson and Wyatt Earp made him not just a businessman, but a key figure in the broader power dynamics of the Old West. He wasn't some shopkeeper who would crumble at the first threat. He was a gunslinger in his own right. Short was cut from the same cloth as Courtright, observed a historian. He'd survived the same places, faced the same dangers, killed the same kinds of men. The difference was that Short didn't need to prove anything anymore. Courtright still did. Tensions escalated quickly between the two men. Courtright, whose ego had been bruised by Short's refusal to comply, confronted him outside the White Elephant Saloon on February 8, 1887. Eyewitnesses reported that Courtright, towering over Short at 6 feet tall, appeared confident as he approached with his hand near his gun, attempting to provoke Short into making the first move. Courtright's plan was simple. He wanted Short to draw first so that he could claim self-defense after killing him. He had done it 100 times before, recalled a witness. Push a man until he reaches for his iron, then put him down and call it justice. It always worked. Always. But Luke Short was no novice in gunfights and had already prepared himself mentally for the standoff. What made this confrontation particularly tense was Courtright's history of outdrawing opponents often faster than they could react. He had already earned a deadly reputation, but this time he underestimated Short's calm under pressure. According to accounts, Courtright reached for his pistol but fumbled slightly as he tried to intimidate Short by pulling his gun from its holster. This brief moment of hesitation proved fatal. Courtright's hand was on his gun, but it wasn't clear. It was tangled. Just for a second? But a second is all it takes. Luke Short, known for his cool demeanor in life-or-death situations, swiftly drew his gun and fired, hitting Courtright in the chest. As Courtright staggered, another shot rang out, this time a clean hit to Courtright's thumb, severing his ability to fire back. He collapsed on the street, mortally wounded. The entire exchange had lasted mere seconds, but in that brief time, one of Fort Worth's most feared figures lay dying in the dirt. "He went down hard," said an eyewitness. The great Jim Courtright, the man everyone was afraid of, bleeding out in the street like any other man. It happened so fast you could barely believe it. Courtright's death marked the end of his reign in Fort Worth and solidified Luke Short's place as a man not to be trifled with. The news of the shootout spread quickly throughout Fort Worth and beyond. It became one of the most talked about events of the era, with newspapers covering every detail. The fact that Short, a smaller man and primarily known as a gambler, had taken down someone as dangerous as Courtright further elevated his status. The aftermath of the duel left an indelible mark on Western history, with Short being acquitted of any wrongdoing due to clear evidence of self-defense. The jury took about 5 minutes, recalled a court clerk. Everyone in that room knew what had happened. Courtright came looking for trouble, and he found it. That wasn't murder. That was survival. Courtright's reputation as both a lawman and a criminal was tarnished by the circumstances of his demise. The duel outside the White Elephant Saloon became legendary, a quintessential example of the deadly politics of the Wild West. "He died the way he lived," concluded a frontier journalist. By the gun, in the street, facing a man who refused to be afraid of him. In the end, that's all any of us get. Number 5. The legacy of Jim Courtright. Jim Courtright's legacy remains deeply complex, marked by his dual roles as both lawman and outlaw. His ability to instill fear made him one of the most effective enforcers of his time, but his methods, often violent and self-serving, blurred the line between justice and criminality. Courtright was a study in contradictions, wrote a historian. He enforced the law and broke it with equal enthusiasm. He protected the innocent and preyed on the vulnerable. He was everything the West was: beautiful, brutal, and impossible to reduce to simple categories. Courtright was a master manipulator, using his authority as marshal to enrich himself through protection rackets, effectively becoming the very thing he was supposed to combat. His efficiency in dealing with outlaws gave him respect, yet his corruption alienated many, making him both feared and despised. "Men like Courtright don't fit neatly into history books," observed a frontier scholar. "They're not heroes, and they're not quite villains. There's something in between, something the West created and then destroyed." Courtright's legacy is also defined by his contradictory nature. While some remember him as a symbol of order during chaotic times, others view him as a predator who preyed on the vulnerabilities of the frontier. His downfall, epitomized by his deadly confrontation with Luke Short, highlighted the inevitable end faced by men who used violence as their primary tool of influence. "The gun that made him also killed him," noted a contemporary. "That's the way it always works. You live by the gun, you die by it. Courtright just happened to be faster than most at both ends of that equation. His life reflects the broader realities of the American frontier, where power was often maintained through force and the line between hero and villain was exceedingly thin. In the end, Jim Courtright wasn't just a bounty hunter or a lawman or an outlaw. He was a product of his environment, a man shaped by violence, defined by fear, and ultimately consumed by the very forces he thought he controlled. The West didn't create men like Courtright, concluded a historian. It just gave them room to be what they already were, and when it was done with them, it swallowed them up and moved on. The frontier always wins. It always has. It always will. Jim Courtright, the deadliest bounty hunter of the American frontier, lived by the gun and died by it too. In the end, that was the only guarantee the West ever offered. If you enjoyed this journey into the history of the Wild West, please like this video and subscribe for more stories of the men and women who shaped and were shaped by America's most violent era. Click the bell icon so you never miss another tale from the frontier.